Hello, and welcome to today's ESHO webinar. My name is Megan, and I'm joined by my colleague, Alicia. And today we'll discuss some of the features in Genesis R&D to use in reviewing your work and your formulas to help ensure accurate labeling. Before we get to the main topic, let me give you a little background on ESHO research. ESHO was established in 1981 and has grown from offering one of the first nutrition and labeling software solutions to a full suite of products and services, including Genesis R&D Foods, Genesis R&D Supplements, REX, our new regulatory document search tool, Food Processor for dietary analysis, and our consulting services that provides labeling services and specialized expertise for industry. Genesis R&D Foods was introduced in 1991 to help address the need for convenient formula analysis and formatting of NLEA food labels for U.S. regulations. Over the years, Genesis has remained the go-to standard for product development, recipe analysis, and nutrition facts creation, as well as restaurant menu analysis and reporting. We offer label modules to prepare compliant labels for U.S., Canada, the EU, and Mexico. If you have any questions about your version, license, or account, please contact the ESHA sales team at sales@esha.com. We continue to add more topics to the webinar schedule. Stay tuned for additional presentations. When you sign up to receive notices or register for upcoming webinars on the ESHA website, you also have an opportunity to provide us with the feedback of the topics that interest or concern you most. And you can find previously recorded webinars on the ESHA website. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording as well as a slide deck following the webinar. Please note that if you have any questions, send those in right away via the GoToWebinar control panel. We have colleagues standing by to help respond to your questions. If we don't happen to get back to you during the webinar, or if your question needs a bit more research than the time allows, we'll follow up with you directly. Today, we will discuss considerations of due diligence and labeling, features in Genesis to help you check your work, such as the nutrients to view, nutrient calculator, check data features, the spreadsheet and other useful reports, and more. And we'll also end with a Q&A. At this time, I will turn it over to Alicia.
Thank you, Megan. So governing agencies like the FDA and the USDA require that food and supplement manufacturers have processes in place to report information on and about products as accurately as possible. These processes should have consistent and standardized steps. And information on product packaging and related resources like websites, your marketing materials, social media, and other outlets shall not be misleading to consumers. So responsibility lies in not only reporting required information, but in a way that can be clearly understood and that doesn't confuse consumers. Information on product packaging and related resources should also bear in mind the protection and safety of consumers. So again, information presented on products needs to be informative, helpful, but in some cases there are also cautionary type statements that need to be made. So it's essential to perform due diligence or have a consistent set of steps and reviews on all aspects of labeling of products to ensure that information is correct and appropriate. In terms of considering your organization's checks and balances, I wanted to focus on some of the features in Genesis that can help you apply practices to achieve consistent steps in recording, determining, and documenting information that is presented on labels and your product packaging. Previously, we presented a series of webinars covering the basic features and considerations when working with Genesis to help get you started. And we talk a bit about applying consistent measures and working with your ingredients, your recipes, and your labels. I'm going to refer to that series a bit throughout this webinar. So if you need an introduction or a refresher on entering ingredients or entering recipes, as well as working with the ingredient statements and the allergen statement features in Genesis, these are all important pieces of performing consistent and complete checks in your labeling processes. Most of the features I'll show you today are mentioned in that Genesis 101 series of webinars, but I wanted to bring some of these ideas together, as well as pose the question, are you utilizing the features and tools available in Genesis to help you perform consistent steps when working with your records? And if you're not already using these, then we wanted to introduce these features and highlight why they may be helpful and important to be using. So let's take a look at some of these tools that are available to you. Genesis includes several predetermined nutrient sets found in the Nutrients to View settings. These are the nutrients that you see on screen when you're working with ingredients and recipes, as well as those that you see on some of the reports, like the Spreadsheet Report or the multi-column report or several others. The Nutrients to View does not select the nutrients that you see on the label. Those are determined in the Edit Label features. But you definitely want to tie these two together. So you want to track any nutrient information that ties into your labeling, and you want to be sure that when you're entering ingredients from your suppliers and when you're checking your recipes, you're reviewing a complete and consistent set of nutrients. So in Genesis, when you click on the Nutrients to View button, you see all of the nutrient sets available. You're seeing an example of that here on this slide. And then you'll see the check mark next to the set that you have selected. By default, there's a Genesis default set, and that has about 60 nutrients. And then you'll see label-related sets, sets based on specific components like the fats and the fat subcomponents, or protein and the amino acids, as well as others. So you can select a different set at any time when you're working with ingredients or working with recipes. You just click on any of the sets when you go through the Nutrients to View settings here. And again, the check mark indicates which set you have selected. You can also create new customized sets of nutrients to view. So keep in mind there's over 170 nutrients and components in Genesis from which to choose. So you can assemble those in any combination, choosing nutrients that are relevant in supporting your labels or those that you want to display on the reports and on screen as you work through the software. So tying back to your checks and balances, you want to be consistent in the nutrients that you track and that you populate and that you report. And keep in mind that your organization, if you have multiple Genesis users, you all want to be aware and consistent with the Nutrients to View sets that you use or that you create, so that you are all working within the same set of nutrients. You're not missing any data fields when you're entering data and when you're reviewing formulas and label information. In working with the nutrient data, you may also want to use the nutrient calculator. So the nutrient calculator performs conversion of nutrient units as well as calculations to fill in some of the blanks that can be determined mathematically. The nutrient calculator functions automatically, or it can be applied as a manual setting. And it can help you populate fields like available carbohydrates or the dietary fiber fields, some of the vitamin fields, and you'll see salt and sodium listed here. Salt is used for EU labeling, so the sodium and salt fields are connected and have a conversion to work between the two. For some of the nutrients like vitamin D, IU to microgram or vice versa, there's a straight conversion from one field to another. And for other nutrients like the vitamins A and vitamins E, you may be prompted for source detail. So if you want to calculate one of those, Genesis will prompt you with, is this coming from an animal or a plant source? Or is it naturally occurring or synthetic? So you'll choose the form or the formula that applies, and then Genesis will perform the appropriate calculation. So again, this is another tool to consistently use to populate as much information as you can. After entering ingredient data or entering recipes in Genesis, a very good practice is to use the Check Data tool. So the Check Data screen includes a set of calculations being run to essentially review your work for you. So this is exactly designed to help you with your checks and balances process. This screen uses color coding to help identify some points that you may need to review and possibly modify. Green typically means a go ahead, and red means that you may want to take a closer look at the numbers. Keep in mind here that the check data screen doesn't necessarily indicate compliance or non-compliance, but it's very helpful means of feedback, and you may need to take action depending on the flags that you see here. This feature is available in the ingredient records, so you can check your data entry for your ingredients, as well as in the recipe records, so you can review how the assembled recipe information looks at a glance. And I'll demonstrate this more in Genesis in just a few moments. The spreadsheet report. You'll hear this repeatedly throughout the ESHA webinars, but it is best practice to review the spreadsheet report for all of your recipes. The spreadsheet lists each ingredient in your recipe and its nutritional content. The nutrients shown here on the spreadsheet are those that are included in the nutrients to view set that you have selected. So you can change the nutrients displayed on this report by choosing from the nutrients to view sets. The spreadsheet also indicates missing values with dashes. So if you see dashes, this tells you where you need to review ingredient records and fill in those missing blanks in order to report complete and accurate information. If your concern is mandatory label nutrients, then you'd select one of the US label nutrient sets. So like the 2016 US label nutrients to view set, and view the spreadsheet. Then if you see dashes on your spreadsheet, you definitely want to fill in those blanks. And you can see in this example, one of my ingredients is missing vitamin D and potassium data. So at a minimum, I would want to check and see that those mandatory label nutrients are populated for all of my nutrients. And then to fill in the blanks, you'd open the ingredient record itself, populate the missing nutrient fields. Once you edit the ingredient record, that pulls through to the recipes that use that ingredient, and then updates your labels with the complete information. Here you may also notice that some values are in red, such as the sodium value. Nutrient values in red can mean that an override value was entered in the recipe. And that was the case with the sodium value here. I entered an override value in my recipe for sodium. So it's showing here in red on the spreadsheet report, as well as some of the other reports. You might use an override value to reflect lab results. So if you sent product out to a lab and got a sodium test performed and came up with a different value than the mathematical analysis, you can use the override feature in Genesis to fine-tune that analysis. Red values also are displayed if you have used the nutrient calculator. So the calculated nutrient values are treated kind of like overrides. The original values are retained in the software, so those don't go away. You can still see those original values, but then the calculated values are displayed on reports and flow through to your labels. And you can also see this recipe has a moisture adjustment, so that's also indicated in red here on the spreadsheet. If you're making a moisture adjustment to your recipe, you will need to be sure that the water field in Genesis is populated for your ingredients, and that you've selected a nutrients to view set that you can view on the spreadsheet that's showing if your water data has been entered or if any is missing. So again, that's indicated by dashes. And we go into more detail about moisture adjustments in a different webinar, but again, I just wanted to introduce this idea of using the nutrients to view and using the spreadsheet report to check for those missing values or investigate if any values need to be reviewed a little further. As part of your standard processes and documentation, you want to capture any relevant information along the way that serves to explain and document decisions or adjustments or maybe conventions or procedures that need to be noted along the way. For instance, in the event of an audit, consider what information do you need to make available to support your ingredients, your recipes, and your labels. And to help with that, Genesis includes notes fields in the ingredient and the recipe record areas so you can record the details that you need. In addition to the notes fields, the Audit Trail in Genesis is a setting that, when enabled, allows you to record a date stamp and user information, as well as comments each time a save occurs. So this is an automatic function that can be turned on, and this creates a trail of edits to help you document the changes that occur, when, and by whom. The Audit Trail records changes in ingredients and recipe records as well. Audit Trail is turned off by default. So if you do need to have this enabled, you may need to talk to your account administrator if you have a desktop installation of Genesis, or for cloud accounts, contact support at esha.com, and they can help you with that feature. Genesis also allows you to attach files directly to your ingredient records and to your recipes to help you capture required or supporting documentation. So again, if you have documentation that supports ingredient records or recipes, like adjustments or override values or other determinations that you've applied, you can attach those supporting materials directly in Genesis. Genesis also offers a variety of reports with various information and formats. So you want to take a look at the reports available in the software and see which work best for you. So I've mentioned the spreadsheet report and encouraged you to review that for your ingredient detail. That's excellent for internal uses. Other reports like the multi-column or the spec sheet, 100-gram, and various other recipe reports provide a look at the total nutrient content. So that's typically shown in either per serving or per 100 grams. Some of the reports especially provide a nice clean look that you can customize with your logo and the company information, and those might be good for exporting or sharing with others. In Genesis, we also have the ingredient statement and allergen statement fields to help you with labeling compliance. We introduced in those, again, the Genesis 101 series webinars, best practice is that as you work with your ingredients, take the time to populate the ingredient statement name field and mark the correct allergens in the individual ingredient records. This is shown in this example where the ingredient statement name and the allergens information indicated for this flour ingredient are pulling through to the recipe that it's used in. And I mentioned these statements together here, but each warrants careful consideration. We discuss working with those ingredient statement and allergen features in much more detail in the Genesis 101 webinar series. So that covers more of the how-to work with these sets of features. But a couple of reminders of the behaviors of Genesis so you can plan accordingly. Genesis includes naming fields to help you build your ingredient statements. And when adding new ingredients to your Genesis, apply consistent naming to the ingredients and use methodical steps to review and mark the allergens for each ingredient so you know those are done correctly. And with the allergen statements with Genesis, we ship the software with all allergens marked. This is intentional and errs on the side of caution. So you need to review and indicate the correct allergens to be sure they're marked appropriately for each ingredient and for your final recipes. So start with the ingredient records to mark each ingredient appropriately, but again, then you'll want to review the final statements in the recipe files. In Genesis, we use groups as the term to categorize records. ESHA software includes a list of groups, including characteristics, database, sections, and food types. You can assign ingredients and recipes to these groups to help filter your searches. You can assign ingredients to multiple groups. So one ingredient or one recipe can be assigned to multiple groups. You can also create your own groups to help you manage your records. You can create groups to assign and track stages of development, for example, or quality control, review stages, or assign ownership and accessibility to records. You can group files or versions of records that are to be included in exporting. So there's great flexibility in this idea of groups. And we also have a full webinar that discusses using groups when organizing your files in much more detail. In addition to groups, Genesis has attributes as a way to help categorize the characteristics of ingredients and recipes. Working with the attributes is a way to help track ingredients and recipes that meet or don't meet a specific characteristic that might be used for regulations, definitions, claims, or other requirements. Attributes might often need accompanying documentation, such as the case with bioengineered or organic certification. When you assign an attribute to an ingredient, that indication pulls forward to recipes in which the ingredient is used. And the attribute feature includes a spot to attach the necessary documentation, so you can bring that documentation right along with your records. So again, using attributes is another item to include on your list of checks and balances to ensure that you are reviewing and flagging ingredients and recipes. We have a wealth of information and resources on the ESHA website. The e-learning center provides you with blogs, tutorials, webinars, and cheat sheets. And one of the available cheat sheets is a nutrition facts label compliance checklist. So we'll include a link to that in the follow-up materials for this webinar, but this checklist can serve as kind of a starting point or a reminder of steps to include in your checks and balances. So we hope that will be helpful. So at this time, I'm going to jump into Genesis and just show some of these features that I've talked about. Here in Genesis, we see the main screen here, and we always like to mention the About button here. This will tell you what version of the software you're running. So again, with current cloud subscriptions, you're always running the current version of the software. For desktop installations, you may or may not be, so you may want to check your About button, see what version you're running. I'm working with version 11.11 today. And then we'll start out, Nutrients to View is also on this home screen from the Home tab here. So clicking on the Nutrients to View, you see a set of lists. These are all the Nutrients to View sets available in the software. This top section in this particular view, this top section are sets of Nutrients to View that I've added to my Genesis. So yours might look a little different under this line here. Then we start seeing all of those that come pre-populated with Genesis. So again, you can see sets that are related to grouping of nutrients, the DRI set, glycemic index information, and then all of the label sets of nutrients to view. So we have sets for Canada, for the EU, for Mexico, our US labeling sets. For those countries that we have a couple different sets of regulations, for instance, the US old 1990 labels, as well as the US 2016 label nutrients, we have different sets for those. Some of the nutrients and even the units changed between sets of regulations. So we have Nutrients to View sets assembled to accommodate those sets of regulations. And then you'll also see we have, for instance, the US 2016 mandatory set of nutrients, which is that smaller set of required nutrients for labeling, as well as US 2016 all. So that includes mandatory as well as voluntary nutrients, a much larger set that are allowed to be reported on US labeling. So quite a variety to choose from there, but again, within your organization, think about which set of nutrients is going to help you perform consistent data entry and checks on the information that you're working with. And then up at the top here is the Modify button. So if you want to create your own set of nutrients to view, choose the Modify button. It will show you the nutrients included in the set that you have currently selected. And then you can choose Edit. You'll see available nutrients on the left, the selected nutrients on the right. Use the arrows, or you can double click to move nutrients or components back and forth between these two. Assemble your set of selected nutrients and then click OK. Save as if it's a set that you're newly creating, and then assign a meaningful name so you know what that set, what the context of that set of nutrients to view is. But again, that's working with the nutrients to view. And again, the check mark indicates the set that you have selected. So I have a 2016 label set with a couple more fields. Then I'll open up an ingredient record. And we can take another look at how that information shows up in the features. So this ingredient record, it's a flour. If I click on the Nutrients to tab, again, the Nutrients to view, the selected set that I have is shown here. So this is my 2016 mandatory nutrients, and then I also have the gram weight field shown, as well as my water field in this particular set. A few more options here within this nutrient screen is Show All Nutrients. So I could choose to show all of the nutrients available in Genesis. So again, over 170 listed there. This view shows them by groups of, or where the nutrients or the components are grouped together. We use the term nutrients. That also applies to really any field or component that you want to track. I've added a few. My user-defined collection has a few that I've added to my Genesis, so you can see those there. So Genesis set is 170 plus any new nutrients or components that you add to your software. And again, here you can alphabetize this list. So they're just appearing straight alphabetical, or again, using those groupings of nutrients, basic components, vitamins, minerals, and so on. You can also set the decimal places here. So this is another set of tying into your checks and balances within your organization, using consistency to view the number of decimal places that are either entered or that are used to review when you're checking the numbers. So that affects this particular view. Then I talked about the nutrient calculator. So here, if the auto calculations box is checked for the nutrient calculator, for an ingredient record, as you enter the data for each nutrient, then Genesis will alert you if another field could be populated based on those values that you just entered. Otherwise, you could manually choose to calculate the nutrients. This is the approach I take. I like to enter the data that I have from, say, my supplier spec, and then after I'll choose the Calculate Nutrients button, and then it will inform me about nutrients additional fields that could be calculated. Keep in mind that the nutrients that you have showing, so if I have my nutrients to view set selected, and I choose the Calculate Nutrients, a smaller set of available calculations will show, as opposed to if I have Show All Nutrients option selected. So say here, if I want to calculate available carbohydrates, I could do so. The software is telling me available carbohydrates is going to be calculated using the total carbohydrates field minus the total dietary fiber field. So I can choose that calculation, perform or run that nutrient calculator, and it's filled in, it's populated my available carbohydrates field. And again, as I mentioned, some of the formulas, you'll see choose a formula. So vitamin A, IU, it's going to prompt me to provide a bit more information. Is my vitamin A coming from an animal, retinol type source, or is it a plant source, a carotenoid type source? So I can choose if it's one or the other, and then the software will perform the appropriate calculation for me. So next, the check button or check data button. If I click on this, it opens up this screen. And again, it's set into several sections. So the first field you see here is this tolerance. By default, Genesis sets a 5% tolerance that tells me if I have an estimated value and the value that I entered, I want that difference to be no more than 5%, or the software will flag it in a certain way. So this top section, calories, is using 4497. It's taking the grams of protein times 4 calories to come up with calories from protein, grams of carbohydrates times 4, grams of fat times 9, alcohol, if there's any, times 7, to come up with an estimated calories value. And then it's comparing it to the calories value that I entered for this ingredient. Then Genesis is telling me how close are these, or how far apart are these. In green, again, this kind of traffic light idea, green gives a go-ahead that they're falling within that tolerance that I have set, and I'm okay to move forward. The tolerance can be adjusted, so you could set it to 0 if you want absolutely no variation allowed, or you could make it greater if you felt that that was appropriate. The fat section is similar. Let me just click this and show you. This will turn up as red if the tolerance falls, or if the difference falls outside the set tolerance. So with these fat components, my total fat is coming from the sum of the saturated, mono and polyunsaturated, and the trans fat. But one thing to note here, so my total fat that I've entered is 0.98, but the sum is only coming up with 0.2. So it's missing. If I go take a look at my fat fields, I didn't enter values for monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats. Those are not mandatory label nutrients, so we don't always have that amount of detail from our supplier information. So I get to choose if this is relevant for my labeling needs or for my reporting needs. If I know that I will never be reporting mono and polyunsaturated fats, then maybe I can choose to disregard that. Uncheck this interpret missing values as 0. These are shown as blank, matching the fields being blank. And then this section turns to green. So I've acknowledged the fact that I'm not going to be reporting mono and polyunsaturated fats, and I can disregard that red flag. So again, that's a matter of preference and a matter of your organization making some decisions along the way to be consistent with your reviews and the information that you're presenting. And then we have the components that add up the total weight of the food, or the proximates section. Those are also important data to review, especially if you're going to be applying a moisture adjustment or any kind of adjustment in that way that would affect or be affected by the components that make up the weight of the food. So this check, again, just sums up the various proximates, protein, carbs, fat, alcohol, water, and ash, and comes up with an estimated weight. I've entered this ingredient per 100 grams, so these weights, there's variation that's occurring here, and it's falling outside of the percent tolerance. So again, if this is important, again, like if you're making a moisture adjustment, you need to report the water information for your ingredients in order to make an accurate moisture adjustment. So from here in this ingredient record, I could enter the information that I need to make this correct and accurate. So I can just plug in a water value, plug in an ash value, and then see how the check data has changed from red to green. So these areas match and give me the go-ahead. This last section here is available carbohydrates. So I use the nutrient calculator to determine that. There's no percent difference shown there. But again, you can see where this check data is designed exactly to help you review, and again, not necessarily out of compliance depending on the sections of this feature, but at least gives you a point and a step in a procedure to make reviews, consistent reviews in your recipes and your ingredients. So let me switch over to a recipe and show you there's a few more similar features within the recipe functions of the software. If I go to open a recipe, edit recipe, I can see, again, there's a nutrients section. Just like with the ingredient, it shows me the selected set of nutrients to view. And I didn't change my set of nutrients to view, so it's the same one showing. The smaller set shows I have the same options. I can show all nutrients. I can alphabetize the nutrients here. Use the auto calculation or calculate nutrients. One difference with the recipe screen here is it has the override column. So I mentioned you could enter overrides if you had lab data to support a variation in the mathematical information that you're seeing, or if you know that known processes affect nutrients in a certain way, such as vitamin degradation. If you know that there are a certain percent of vitamin value that is lost, you could certainly make adjustments in the override column, and then that will affect the values that show up on your reports and even your labels. And again, there's the check data view in the recipe itself. This is showing up in yellow. So again, that traffic light approach. I have certain sections that are showing in green. The yellow is indicating my fat section here. I have all of my components plugged in. They're falling outside of the tolerance, the 5% tolerance, but not by that much. So here you would want to ask, is there a reasonable explanation for the numbers not adding up? With fats, there might be the glycerol backbone component of the fat makeup that could be contributing. And so while we're reporting these specific components of fat, we're missing that glycerol component. So those numbers, there could be an explanation or a reasonable explanation that those numbers don't add up exactly. And then again, with the recipe, the spreadsheet report, we always emphasize the importance of that. This first spreadsheet is the one I'm talking about. We have two spreadsheets. One is the label rounded, so it's giving you rounded label rounding rules applied. We want to take a look at this first unrounded spreadsheet report. So again, this is showing your recipe per serving or for the amount that you've indicated in your recipe settings. And then you have each ingredient listed down here. And then across the screen, you see the columns of the nutrients, again, set by the nutrients to view set that you have selected. And decimal precision here can be selected or changed. Here I would go to the Home tab and my preferences to set a different decimal precision. So maybe I want to change that to 4. And then here you can see there's more detail. So again, something to talk about within your organization, how many decimals, how much precision do you need to see when you're reviewing these? And again, when you look at the spreadsheet report, do you see any dashes on nutrients? Do you see any values in red? Do you see anything that needs to be addressed or that seems out of line that you would need to go back to the recipe itself or to the individual ingredients and make any adjustments? So then we also have the notes field. I talked about that. Let me just expand this screen a little bit. And you can see there are notes sections available. Again, in the ingredient record has notes, the recipe section here as well. If I go to my recipe tab, there's a notes. You can access the notes section here as well. These notes could be used internally or externally for a variety of purposes. You might have different teams throughout your organization who could make use of the different notes fields. So again, you want to use consistency there. You can rename these notes titles. So I just clicked on the title for this notes field, the recipe section, and I could change this to, say, this is marketing's notes field that they want to use. So I just make that change, and then any notes applying to the marketing team could apply there. But again, there's flexibility there, so use those consistently in whatever manner works best for you. We have attachments for the recipe files here. And so just clicking on this tab, again, this might be if you have any adjustments or lab documentation that you want to attach directly to this recipe. This is the spot to do that. I have saved here a PDF of this recipe, but from some time ago. I've edited this recipe a lot, and so I created a snapshot in time of this recipe. This particular version has a different serving size set, and this version doesn't have my cholesterol overrides showing. But I just wanted to show that as an example that you can print any of the reports in your recipe, take a snapshot in time, and then later it serves to help compare. When I open this recipe, it's a live pull of all the information available for the ingredients and the recipe itself. So if I have made any changes by saving a previous version of this recipe, I have a comparison from today's view to this previous view of the recipe. And then with attachments, you can drag and drop files, or you can browse your files and bring them in and attach them to this record. I want to show you just a couple of the reports. As I mentioned, there's quite a variety in Genesis, so you want to look through these and use those that work best for you. I'll take a look at the single nutrient report. This one is helpful for internal uses for formulation purposes. It's designed to help you investigate the contributions from each ingredient to your per serving amount of the recipe. So it's ranking the ingredients by the order of the nutrient that you have selected. So again, this set of nutrients is pulled in from the nutrients to view set that you have selected. So I can choose sodium, and this is listing my ingredients in the order that they're contributing to the sodium per serving. I could choose a different nutrient and see how it resorts the ingredients based on those contributions. So one way this report could be used is if you view the single nutrient report and say butter was way down at the bottom and I had other ingredients reporting higher fat, does that make sense? If not, do I need to check the butter data that I have entered my fat value and be sure that that was entered properly? Or again, back to the sodium example, if I'm wanting to formulate a lower sodium form of this recipe, I could certainly use the single nutrient report to view my ingredients in order, identify which ingredients are contributing the most sodium. Here it's obviously salt, but and then if I know that I have a different ingredient that provides lower salt content, I could create another recipe that's a low sodium version of this recipe. So again, another way to work with the reports to help you review and perform checks on the information. And again, the 100-gram spec sheet report is another one that's just helpful in getting information once it's been reviewed out to those that need it. So say you have clients or customers that need an ingredient or your product spec information, you could use the 100-gram spec sheet report. You can change the amount. By default, it's set to 100. You could certainly switch that to a per serving amount. If you do, then the nutritional data adjusts accordingly here. There is also fields available for the date and then signature and comments information down below to create a report that is available or accessible to send to others as you might need it. I'll just show the print preview form of this report so you can add your logo and company information, and it just provides a nice clean report that can also have sign off information on it. And again, briefly, I want to show you the ingredient statement and the allergen statement features, but we do talk about those in additional webinars. So the ingredient statement, you would want to perform the necessary checks and consistent checks to be sure you're reporting the correct names for your ingredients and creating an ingredient statement that is compliant. Same with the allergen statement, that you are reviewing each ingredient as you go, but then as a final check, be sure that the ingredients that are indicating allergens are making sense. Or if there's any, for any reason, an allergen that's introduced along the way that wasn't reported already, making sure that that is accounted for and reported correctly. There's also the claims. I'll just talk briefly about the claims. Genesis provides this claims feature so that based on your label and the nutrient levels in your recipe, Genesis will identify potential claims that can be made. So if you plan to make any claims on your product, you want to be sure to review the nutrients and the supporting ingredient information to ensure that the claim is appropriate. So things, again, like checking the completeness of data with the spreadsheet report or performing the data checks on your ingredients and your recipes, as well as understanding the rules around the claim that you wish to make so that your product packaging and your other references are all correct. Just a couple more features in the recipe set of functions that I want to mention. So we have groups, again, as a way to assign ingredients and recipes to help you sort and search. I mentioned that by default we ship Genesis with rather food-based groups, so food types, characteristics about the foods, sections of the database that help sort and filter searching, but you can create new groups in a way that works for your production or your reviews and checks and balances. So you could set up groups for your particular teams in your organization or the processes of getting a formula from theory to production to finalizing all the way through regulatory. So I've created a few groups in my Genesis that reflect these. So if I know that this recipe is ready for regulatory's eyes, ready to go through label checks and final stages, I could mark it as regulatory to help steer and search through the files, all my files that I have in Genesis. And again, we have another webinar that goes into much more detail about using groups to organize your files. Attributes, again, these can be accessed through the edit recipe, or we have a groups and we have an attributes button here at the top. So again, attributes are a way to track certain traits about your recipes. We start with recipe or attributes at the ingredient level, and that information pulls through to the recipe. So Genesis includes the bioengineered attribute, so you'll see that in the current versions of the software, but you can also add your own, as you've seen I've done here. The attributes works with rules, so add an attribute and you can assign the rule on how that attribute will behave. For instance, my no artificial color attribute, in this case, all items in the food, all the ingredients in my recipe must have the no artificial color attribute in order for this to be true for the recipe. Whereas the bioengineered rule is that if at least one ingredient, one item in the food or the recipe has the bioengineered attribute, then this recipe will be flagged as bioengineered. And here in this qualifies column, green check mark means yes, the attribute is true. Red means no, it does not apply. The question marks mean it's unknown, so you may need more. There may be need to review more information about the ingredients and the recipe, and you can override these determinations. So if there's an exemption that applies, or for whatever reason warrants that that override be applied, you can certainly do that. And again, there's a section here to attach the necessary documentation to support the attribute that's being declared. So you can see all of these tools are here in Genesis to help you track and review the information that you need. And we'll send you additional materials and the links to the webinars that I've mentioned, so you'll have a more complete instruction and resources to work with your ingredients, your recipes, and your labels. So at this time, I will turn it back to Megan.
Thank you, Alicia. Okay. So, in addition to the webinars that we present here and the list that Alicia will share, we also offer formal instruction on the software. Genesis R&D training classes dive much deeper into working with the software features and discussions on regulations, and also working through example formulas and specific scenarios. We offer both in-person classes as well as online instruction. In-person classes occur at our Oak Brook, Illinois training facility. You can see some of the upcoming dates for training listed here. And there's a full schedule of upcoming classes on the ESHA website. Please note the format of online classes has changed. In order to accommodate schedules and to offer trainings in more digestible pieces, the online courses now occur in shorter blocks of time extended over the course of more days. On this slide, we offer the explanation of the difference between professional and advanced training. You can begin with the professional and then take advanced in the same course consecutively, or take professional and take advanced later. But note that to take advanced, you have to have the prerequisite of professional training. You can find registration information and other details on the ESHA website. If you have any questions about the classes, or if you need to schedule a group training specifically for your organization, please contact training@esha.com. You can stay in touch with ESHA in a variety of ways. If you need to get in touch with our sales, support, or consulting teams, please reach out by phone or email. We also invite you to join us in the ESHA LinkedIn community, and you can find additional resources and subscribe to our blog and newsletter on the ESHA website. Now we will address some Q&A. First question. Are there processes in place to have quality control, approval, and locks on recipes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned using groups to establish and track the steps in your processes. So you can assign the recipes or ingredients to the various groups as they move through the proper stages and approvals. So that's one piece or one part of the approach. And then we also have the ESHA security module available to help with locks and permissions, that idea of which files can be accessed by whom. So again, the tips for organizing your files and records webinar discusses more detail about using the groups in a way with the ESHA security module to help with your security and your just restrictions or permissions information. So if you need more information about the security module, please get in touch with our sales team. Thanks.
Great. Next question. The added sugars on my label is more than the total sugars value. Why is this?
So that brings up a great opportunity to review your information. That's a great question. We have had customers experience that. So if on the label, if you see added sugars as greater than totals, it's most likely that there was an error or a missing piece of information in one of the ingredient records, or could be an override. But what we would trace back to for that, because your added sugars should not be greater than your total sugars on your label, go back to your spreadsheet report and review that. Take a look at each ingredient and the total sugars and added sugars values and see if any ingredient, which ingredient of those is reporting a higher added sugars value. Identify the ingredient, go back to your ingredient record and make the proper changes so that information is correct on your label.
Okay, thank you so much. Next question. If I don't have 2016 mandatory and sulfites under my nutrients to view, does that mean I have an older version of Genesis?
It's very possible, because that is one of the nutrient sets that are included in Genesis. So if you're not seeing that in your nutrients to view, the 2016 mandatory or 2016 label nutrients plus sulfites, take a look at your version number. So again, cloud version, cloud installation should have the current version running. If it's a desktop installation, then click on that About button and see what version you're running, and either contact your account manager or get in touch with our sales team.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is just looking for further clarification. Auto calculation in the nutrients tab is a cross-check. It's not automatically filling in the information, is it?
It is filling in the information. So no, it's not just a cross-check. It's alerting you at first, but then Genesis will automatically fill in the blanks if you choose to use that calculation. So you check the box that indicates, yes, I want to use that. And then it will automatically populate the field for you. So again, consider if auto calculations works for you, if that's your preference, or if you want to come back and manually take a look at those calculations available to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Alicia. That is all the time we have for today's webinar. We thank you for joining us and have a great day.